Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This is going to be a fairly long one. I've got a lot of children's review titles that are coming out this week, so get comfy, get a drink, settle in. We're going to talk about a whole stack of books. The first one is a picture book that was sent to me for review by Hachette. They reached out and asked if I would be interested in reviewing it, and it is George the Wizard by Tony Armstrong and illustrated by Emma Jean Bukers, I think. Sorry if I've mispronounced anything. And this is the story of George, who is a wizard. And George doesn't have many friends and is a little bit lonely, but doesn't really know how to go out and make friends. There's some anxiety around that. George is pretty cool. He loves flying around his mountain. He loves creating magic and is just a really lovely character. And so this book is about George finding friends and having the courage to step outside of his comfort zone and the benefits of showing people who you really are. It's really gorgeous. It's very bright and fun and colourful. There's a lot of emotion on each page. And I love the way that the design of the book has actually been put together, because even though it's a picture book, it looks very much like a graphic novel in picture book form, because it's got the big colours and it then has the bubble writing to emphasise what's happening in the story. So I had a great time reading this, so thank you to Hachette for sending me a review copy. The next 8 books were sent to me by Alan and Unwin, so thank you to them. There's some picture books, there is some junior fiction, there is some middle fiction, and one book that I haven't quite got to yet is a young adult title, and I'll hopefully get to that in the next week, so you'll hear about it soon. So we'll start with the 2 picture books that they sent me. The first one being A Beginner's Guide to Choosing the Perfect Pet by Ali Rutstein and illustrated by Tommy Doyle. This one is a really fun story about choosing the perfect pet for your family. And it takes kind of that idea of the perfect pet and what you would consider a perfect family pet and turns it on its head. So some of the animals that are recommended in this story may not be your first choice, like a polar bear, but the author tries to give you a convincing reason why they would make a really great pet. It's a really fun little story. I am currently in the middle of teaching a persuasive unit. When I read it, I'm like, this is actually really fun because it's a really simple way to talk about how you can have an opinion, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same opinion that everyone else has. And I thought this would be a really fun one to take in and actually read to my class because it fits in very nicely with what we're talking about. Very bright and colourful and a perfect read aloud. The language in here is great. And then we have The Backyard Games by Alistair, Nicholson and Tom Jellett. This book features Tom Jellett's very distinctive illustrative style. I have a few books by various authors illustrated by Tom Jellett, and I can always pick his books out straight away. This is about a group of neighbourhood friends who come together to create their own version of the Olympic Games in the backyard. It's a coming together of friends and families and celebrating sport. I really loved in this one how all of the kids end up representing different countries. So they draw countries out of a hat, and that's kind of how they're set up. And then they use things around them in their homes and in their backyards to create their own version of the Olympics, which is really fun. It's very reminiscent of summertime here in Australia and the kinds of things that you get up to with your neighbours and your friends. And I mean, coming from a very sports obsessed country, this is very, very on brand. I do have one more picture book that I'm going to talk about at the end of this list, but before I get to that, I will talk about the other titles and I'll explain why in a moment. So I was sent the next 2 books in the Legends of Sport series by Alan and Unwin. These are a series of unauthorised biographies coming out about Australian sports people in various sporting fields. So there is a new book in the Football Legends series looking at famous Australian soccer players. In this case, so far we've had 2 female soccer players who play for the Matildas. This book is about Mary Fowler. Again, I don't know much about sport outside of ice hockey here in Australia, so all of this is really good information for me to have. And I had no idea who Mary Fowler was or why she was so important to the sport, which is kind of the point of this book. And the second one they sent me is F1 Legends, and this one is about Daniel Ricciardo, whose name I do actually know because my dad tends to watch motorsports every now and then. Do I know much about that? Absolutely not. But it was really interesting to find out more about the sport and about how Daniel came to rise it through the ranks within the sport and sort of the steps that it takes to become an F1 racer as well, which I have never really thought about. The really cool thing about these books, they're fairly short. There is a lot of text and information in the books, but it's broken up into very manageable chunks just with the design layout. So everything's kind of spread out under particular categories as you go through sort of how each person started in their sport, the things that helped them to become famous. So, you know, career highlights and little bits of information about how they've traveled around the world or where they've played previously. They also have bits of information about the sport and also then just random facts about these individuals, which is really cool. So I've got 2 of these already in my classroom and I'm going to be adding these 2. And I know I'm going to have a few people who are very interested in picking them up because they are mad sports people. All right, then moving into some middle fiction. Garth Nix has a new book out. This is We Do Not Welcome Our 10-Year-Old Overlord, and this book was a little bit disturbing and creepy, if I'm honest, but it is about Kim, who lives with his sister and his parents on a sustainable living kind of farm, and it's set in the 1970s. It's kind of like an alternate 1970s Australia. And one day they're out with some friends of theirs, and Isla finds a globe in the middle of a lake, and this globe is glowing. When they all touch it, everyone reacts kind of differently. Kim is terrified because he hears this voice in his head and he feels like somebody's just trying to weave its way into his mind. And yet his sister is just attached to this ball. And then strange things begin happening. This glowing ball of a light suddenly disguises itself as a basketball, and suddenly his sister is doing all sorts of weird and strange things. Animals begin turning up dead, and just weird things are happening around the town. And it appears that Isla has been given these really strange abilities. And Kim is really, really freaking out and is trying to understand it and trying to find out what's going on and trying to separate his sister from this glowing ball that she found. This book pays homage to Dungeons and Dragons. The kids in this book play Dungeons and Dragons, and there's a lot about that storyline and the camaraderie that comes from playing that. As someone who has never played Dungeons and Dragons, but who knows people who have and who have talked about it, around me, I recognize the elements of it within the book. Overall, it's a really fast-paced, really kind of creepy / disturbing middle fiction, sci-fi, horror-y kind of story for kids. And it's written very much in Garth Nix's trademark style. He's a very readable author, and you're just kind of left on the edge of your seat trying to figure out what is going on and how this is all going to resolve itself. The back of the book says perfect for fans of Stranger Things. As someone who has not watched that, I'm only going to assume that is correct. So if that sounds like it's your thing, then this book is probably going to be of interest to you. And then I read Thunderhead by Sophie. This is another middle fiction story, although this one is probably for a slightly older audience than the previous book. This one is about Thunderhead. It's told entirely through journals that Thunderhead are writing on a defunct forum for a band that no one talks about anymore. Thunderhead is a pseudonym for our character. They are obsessed with music to the point where people consider them a music snob. They have just found out that they have not one but 2 tumours near their ears, and that they need to have surgery to remove one of them, which means that they'll have 50% hearing loss, and that they potentially have a disease that will progressively cause them to lose their hearing over time. This is absolutely devastating to them because they are they're so immersed in music, and that's everything in their life. The only way that they're kind of coping with this is by sharing their feelings and what's going on in these journals. Throughout all of this, we see a lot of other changes because their best friend has moved schools and has a new group of friends, and we see how that relationship has changed, and Thunderhead is trying to cling to that relationship while also realizing over time that maybe that friendship has now moved on, particularly with everything else that's going on in their life. But they also then struggle to make new friends because they've always been the friend of one person, and their interests have been so closely intertwined that opening themselves up to different points of view is really tricky. And of course, that's compounded by the fact that they are grieving what could potentially be happening to them. So it is a really, really heartfelt and touching story. It is a love song to music, but it is also a story of that grief and grieving for yourself when you know a huge change is coming and you know that you're going to lose a part of yourself and have to adapt to a world where you aren't able to participate with it in exactly the same way anymore. Sophie, the author, has written this based off some of her own experiences with hearing loss. She also has the same condition as the character in the book, and so that comes across in the book, that there is that really deep connection to this character and to what they're going through. So it's a really, really wonderful book. Highly recommend it. Even though it's long, it's a fairly fast read, and most chapters begin with a playlist of songs that define the chapter, but are also a huge significant part of Thunderhead's life. All right, then there is a young adult graphic novel. This is The Sweetness Between Us by Sarah Winifred Searle. This is perfect for spooky season, and it is the story of Pearlie and Amandine. Both of these characters are 16 years old. They have both recently gone through some pretty significant life changes. Pearlie has been diagnosed with diabetes, and Amandine has been turned into a vampire because she was ill. And this causes a lot of significant life changes for both of them, and they meet when they both return to school and have some independent tutoring classes to help them catch up. And both characters are dealing with, a lot of feelings to do with the changes in their life. Pearlie is still learning how to manage his diabetes and is also aware that his parents are under some financial burden because now he has a huge number of medical costs that are associated, and they weren't all that well off to begin with. And so he's aware of that. And Amandine is, just struggling with the fact that she was turned into a vampire when she was quite young, and that was not supposed to happen for a long time in this world. She comes from a family of vampires, but it's a choice when you decide to become a vampire. But because she was unwell, her family made that choice for her. And so there's complications around that. And it's also complicated by the fact that she was a vegan and now she has to drink blood, and so she's struggling with that. However, through the course of their interactions, Pearlie and Amandine become friends, and then they also realize that they have feelings for one another. Again, this then is complicated when Amandine realizes that she is able to detect Pearlie's blood sugar levels. So they begin testing a drop of his blood by her tasting it in order to save money on his testing strips, and this blurs the line in their relationship and causes some really complicated relationship dynamics. Alongside all of this, we learn more about who they were before they went through their life changes and how they're sort of struggling to find their way back. In Pearlie's case, he's trying to reconnect with old friends, but is clinging to who he was before, and so that makes it a little bit difficult. And Amandine is trying to understand her family connection to being vampires and their history, and also how in this world there's some really cool vampire mythology stuff where the longer you are a vampire, the more changes your body undergoes, and so that's really interesting. The whole thing is just really, really cleverly done. The illustrations and the colour palette and all of that are great. It was just a really interesting read, and I had read Sarah Winifred Searle's previous graphic novel, which won a lot of awards here in Australia, but I think this one is my favourite of the two. I just really, really enjoyed their story and the way that they explored their relationship, and then what happened when their relationship wasn't working so well. So I do highly recommend this one. And then the final review title I'm going to talk about in this video is a picture book. I said I would mention this one last. It is Into the Ice, Reflections on Antarctica by Alison, Alistair and Tulloch. This one is basically it's like an art journal kind of picture book. It is non-fiction. It is about Alison Lester and Tulloch's journeys to Antarctica. Both of them are artists and creators and writers, and they have taken multiple trips to Antarctica, both as artist fellows, but also for their own interest. And this is a collection of Antarctic history and their journey and the artwork that they created either while they were there or as a result of their trips to Antarctica. It's a really, really gorgeous book. This is actually like a perfect coffee table kind of picture book. There are photographs, gorgeous artwork. There's information about the continent and like just sketches and the history of Antarctic exploration. Look at this. I've talked about this in other videos. I love stories set in Antarctica. They're usually like action and adventure stories because Antarctica is Antarctica. I also have a deep fascination just with it as a continent. I think it is really, really interesting. Look, all the explorers. And when I saw that this was coming out, I'm like, I just need to read this book. And just, I had the best time just sort of sitting through and reading it. As I said, there's a lot of information, there's quotes, there's Alison and Coral's own reflections, and it's a really, really beautiful book if you're at all interested in the Antarctic continent. And thank you to Ellen Unwin for sending me all of those books. I was really excited because I got a huge box this month and I have just had the best time exploring them. We're so lucky to have such great Australian children's literature, and I am always thrilled to explore new books. Which then brings me to everything else that I read this week that is not a new release. So I should say I didn't read every single one of those books this week because I've been reading them over the last couple of weeks, but they come out this week, and so I kind of saved them for closer to release date. So don't freak out because I also read quite a few other things. Kicking off with a reread of Magic Rises and Magic Breaks by Ilona Andrews. These are books 6 and 7 in the Kate Daniels series. I just had the graphic audios on while I was doing housework and things like that, and I realized I was 2 books behind in my graphic audio reread and they'd come out, so I just put them on, and I'm thoroughly glad that I did because book 6 introduces one of my favorite side characters, Christopher, and is the start of the Christopher and Barabbas relationship. It's also kind of the first time we get a significant amount of Hugh on page in the stories as well, and so that was really interesting to see how the casting was done around that, and then that continues in Magic Breaks, and I think these 2 books are some of my favorite books in the series just because of the way that they move the story forward. So that was really fun to read those. And then I also read Unprincely by Ian Finley, which is an MMF royal romance by Ian Finley, which I've had for ages and I just have never picked up. And I just finished reading the famous series and I just felt like continuing to get through some Ian Finley books. So this one is about a prince who is bisexual. He's not in line for the throne, but then everyone before him in line is killed in a car accident, and suddenly he finds himself the face of the royal family, and his grandfather is not happy about this because he's never considered Xander as someone who is appropriate to take over the throne because he has been a playboy and he very openly disregards sort of the etiquette of being a royal prince. But after the death of his parents and his sister, he is thrust into this limelight, and suddenly it's a year later and they're trying to find him a wife he's not really sure that he wants, and he meets Lady Delia, and the two hit it off because she's rather irreverent, and the two of them end up at an exclusive sex club where they're all masked, and Xander comes face to face with his former personal guard, Roman, but he doesn't realize that it's Roman. Roman immediately recognizes him, and the three of them have this one night in this sex club where no one really knows the other's identity until Xander figures it out. And then he can't stop thinking about it. And so the three try to make this relationship work with all of the pressures of being in the spotlight and being under media scrutiny and under royal family scrutiny. And it's messy. It's messy. I won't say that it's my favourite of Eden Finley's works, but it was a really interesting read. I don't read royal romances very often, so it's always really an interesting time when I pick one up. I also read Icebreakers, which is the first book in the Game Breakers series by Elise, Faber and Kat Mizera. This one came out last week and I received a review copy of it. Ultimately, I have not talked about it yet because the more I think about this book, the more it bothers me. And I said when I gave my feedback that I wouldn't be reviewing it on release day because I don't think that's fair. And I don't think the book is badly written, but I think it does a lot of things that I don't personally like in romance books. And so for me, I couldn't in good faith review it. So this is the story of Aspen and Banks. It's a hockey romance and Banks is the hockey captain. And I'm very confused about why he's captain because he's actually doesn't display a lot of the traits that you would expect to see a captain of a hockey team, display. And so straight off the bat, that confused me. Aspen is working two jobs. She works as a cleaner at the arena and she also works as a bartender at the bar that is owned by Banks and some of his friends. They don't make that connection straight away. So they have this first moment at the arena where she doesn't know who he is, doesn't recognize, and is freaked out by her. And he's left his keys and everything behind and can't get in, and she doesn't believe that he is who he says he is. And then they meet again at the bar, but he doesn't recognize her, and I'm very confused as to why he doesn't, but anyway, that's beside the point. The whole relationship dynamic felt off in this one because it kind of starts out as I don't want to say hate to love, it's more antagonistic to love, and she is very reluctant to get involved with a hockey player but then is suddenly very much involved with him. There's also a plotline with the really creepy bar manager who is just absolutely disgusting towards Aspen. And I don't have this in my notes, but I think I just had given up at that point, but I have a feeling that there is an unexpected pregnancy in this one and the reaction is just not great. And also the way that the pregnancy comes about is also not great. I just felt like everything was just slightly off in this book. So not a favorite. I didn't DNF it because I was holding out hope that it would improve, but it didn't. I also read Big Witch Energy by Molly Harper, and I got this from NetGalley, and it is the story of Caroline and Ben. Caroline has lived on the island of Starfall for her entire life. Her family has been cursed that if they leave, they die. And so that's a big part of this story. And Ben is someone who used to live on the island but has returned there after his divorce to his wife, and he's brought his two teenage children with him, both of whom seem to have some kind of magic ability. And so Caroline is a witch. She's part of a coven on the island, and Caroline and Ben have a history that is complicated by the fact that he wanted to leave. He went to medical school, he's a doctor, and she couldn't leave, and he couldn't understand why because he didn't know about the curse, and if he did, he really wouldn't have believed it in the first place. So there's a whole lot of little subterfuge and a mystery plot and everything that's going on in this book, but at its core, it's just kind of a cozy paranormal romance story. Molly Harper does a great job with all of those. There's a lot of fun side characters that pop up in all of the books, and it's just enjoyable. I also read Just Bromantically Invested by Saxon James. This is the fourth book in the Accidental Love series. It is the penultimate book, and I'm really sad about this because I love all the characters. It is Madden and Penn's story. It is a queer best friends to lovers story. Madden and Penn have been friends for absolute years. Madden lives in Big Bertha, which is the house that all of the main characters live in, and together they own a landscaping business. And the whole way through the series, one of the things we've learned about Madden is that he is a nudist, and he is so much more comfortable wearing nothing than he is wearing clothes. And you see throughout the story how uncomfortable and how un-him he feels when he's wearing clothing. And it's how they move from being friends to lovers, and Penn's journey of discovering that maybe he is bisexual or maybe it's just Madden, and how that relationship dynamic changes. There is a brief moment where Madden thinks Penn is cheating on a partner with him. It's not actually that case because Penn freaks out and is pretending to date someone in order to sort of get over feeling uncomfortable in a situation. So they have to talk about that and the fact that that's not something that either of them value. And the two of them have a lot to work through. Like, it's not an easy relationship and it's not an easy adjustment for either of them, but it is very sweet. I mean, that's the hallmark of Saxon James's characters, is that, no one writes idiots to lovers like Saxon James, and I mean that in the best possible way. I don't mean that the characters are not intelligent, because they are both very intelligent characters, but they just maybe aren't as savvy emotionally, and so that's what they're mostly dealing with. Bonus points, there is no third act breakup, and so that always makes me happy. And I can't believe we got through all of those books, and I'm sorry, my camera keeps trying to adjust the focus on the pumpkin in the background. That pumpkin needs to go away very soon because it's very annoying for filming. Thank you very much for watching. I'd love to know in the comments if you read any of these books or if you're planning on picking any of them up, or if you have recommendations for similar books. Otherwise, feel free to leave a crown emoji down below to let me know that you're here. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.